Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota.
Well, now I can finally have a good excuse for not having to do the face-to-face interviews as much anymore because of the coronavirus. So, Senator?
That's right. If I start coughing, then you don't have to worry.
So let's talk about that to kick it off. We're going to talk about a number of things here with U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer, but one of the things I did want to talk about is the coronavirus, mostly from kind of the economic point of view, but also from mostly the social engineering point of view, too. There's a couple different angles there, but talk to me a little bit about the economic side because it's really impacting the economy.
Well, it's an interesting point because it's certainly disrupting the markets, and oftentimes the markets are a precursor to the economy. Sometimes markets respond to fundamental economic stimulus. In this case, I think the markets are well ahead of the economy, but there's no question that the economy is struggling, and it's obvious that it's going to struggle when you have a disruption in trade, you have a disruption in supply chains and value chains, and then of course add to that the emotion that follows, and you have pullbacks in investments and things. But on the energy sector, Jason, it really gets very pragmatic. One thing about oil and gas in particular, I mean, oil is a commodity. It is and while there are certainly ways to trick the markets, if you will. There's hedging, and there are ways that maybe the market price can reflect something other than the fundamentals. At the end of the day, it's still a buyer-seller commodity. And as a result of the coronavirus, as we know, there's been a tremendous shift in demand. Demand is down. I mean, when there's 30% fewer people flying on airplanes, and you have travel bans, and you have a lot of events being canceled, and 25% of travel either comes from or goes through China, and clearly that demand is going to be down. And in addition to that, we're already having a little bit of a demand challenge because, of course, you've got more efficient vehicles, and you've got electric vehicles. So all of that said, on top of it, you have this coronavirus, and in the middle of that, you have shenanigans, and those shenanigans begin, of course, with Vladimir Putin and Russia deciding to not go along with a supply cut with OPEC plus one, and when they decided that not only were they not going to participate in the cut, they're going to provide an increase in supply to glut a market that's already glutted. Of course, the Saudi prince came back with we'll show you, and they increased their supply, and now they've increased it again, and we're near as I can tell, Jason, we're at something like 4 million extra barrels of oil per day compared to where we were before the discussions of a possible supply cut. So we really have a very bad market situation right now, a very bad price situation in the oil markets, and I don't have to tell you what that means to places like the Bakken. All the shale plays are hurting badly as a result of this. It's not just a price slump, but a price collapse.
That was the one thing that really, I guess, is not lost on me with the whole coronavirus is that the reaction of the masses of people. I mean, you're talking about behaviors of individuals acting in large numbers, people staying from home, canceling of live events. These are masses of people that are so large. It is almost like, shenanigans where Russia and Saudi Arabia can decide they're going to pull some barrels of oil off or on the market. Do you know what I mean? Because they have the power of a country to do something like that, whereas the coronavirus really did change enough behaviors to impact the marketplace. That's incredible to me, based on those other things you said, too, that the energy industry already had a 1-2 punch. And Senator Cramer, I want to transition into a third punch, or a fourth punch, if you will, and that's the rise of environmentalism. So many pipeline projects and so many refineries and different energy projects out there are getting hemorrhaged financially by the rise of the environmentalist and eco-law and eco-justice, if you will. Talk to me a little bit about just what's going on from your neck of the woods in the halls of Congress when it comes with the rise of, I call it the cult of environmentalism.
Well, it certainly is an extreme version of environmentalism that's really rooted more in political liberalism than it is in concern for the environment. Because if you really cared about the environment, you'd want more pipelines because that's the most environmentally safe way to move a product that is in high demand. While it's a shrinking demand right now, it's ultimately in high demand, and we have to have it. I mean, and I don't need to go into all the details of that unless you want to, Jason, but you raise an important point, because this is splashing over not just into protests of permits, or protesting literally at construction sites. Those things are inconveniences, and those things can certainly delay important projects. But now they've gotten into the banking community. Now I serve on the banking committee, so on the one hand, I serve on the Environment and Public Works Committee that oversees some of the regulatory side of things, and then I also serve on the banking committee, which oversees the financial side of things. Well, now they've convinced large banks. I mean, some of the biggest names that you and I know of, and they've intimidated them into pulling back on lending and investing in these fossil projects. Well, you cut off large access to large amounts of money. These are highly capital intensive projects, obviously, and that this is another way around, or another way to attack the entire industry. So that I've gotten very involved in going after the banks that have acquiesced to this bullying. I don't believe that banks who are insured by the federal government, that is to say the taxpayers of this country, ought to be making decisions to deny credit to legal companies that are in good standing and have every right and reason and frankly responsibility to build out. But we're seeing a lot of capex being cut now as a result of these low prices in North Dakota and throughout the country. I think you're gonna, I've had enough personal conversations with company CEOs to know that there's going to be a real serious pullback, and some of that has not been announced yet, so I'm not going to. But yeah, the environmental movement is alive, it's well, and it's vicious right now. And, we need to stand up for commerce.
It's really something else, because when you look at the energy industry, they're going through a change, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But the environmental side of things, I want to say the last 2 or 3 major conferences that had to deal with climate change, from the UN to whatever the last one was last week, it's not the scientists and their verified data that's getting the headlines. It's a 16-year-old girl. And the energy industry has spent billions of dollars trying to educate and promote and do PR, and they're getting the crap kicked out of them by a 16-year-old girl.
Well, that's because our media loves that.
I know.
Love that sort of activism. They love that level of emotion, and it doesn't have to be practical. It doesn't even have to be true. It just has to be sort of romantic or sexy, and they run with it, and it's become very irresponsible, Jason. That's why forums like what you provide, the type of formats you provide on the radio show, on the podcast, in print. I mean, it's really important that a more balanced view gets out there, because it's more educational rather than emotional. And unfortunately, even our large financial institutions can fall for that, and certainly our large media falls for it.
Well, and we've been trying to explain that for a while now, that this rise of environmentalism is real, and it is impacting the legal system, and it's impacting the banking system, to where, like you said, now the ESMP, ESG, there's 2 different acronyms, whether you're a company and whether you're a specific organization, but you're having to get certified now that you're environmentally conscious. So that part of the industry is changing, is how we get banking. I've been saying this for probably the last 3-4 years, Senator Cramer, that CEOs like Harold Hamm have been on the show back in 2012, 13, and beginning of 14, when it was $100 oil. Boy, we could get the CEOs no problem. Now it's like a rare albino elk sighting, man. They're hard to get to nowadays. But what they would say on a program like this is the paradigm shift. And I'd always say that CEOs, they're not like news pundits and political pundits. They don't exaggerate and be bombastic. When they say something, they mean it because they got shareholders listening, they got attorneys listening.
That's right.
And so when they say that, you start thinking, well, what do they mean by paradigm shift? Well, okay, big data has really changed the wellhead. It's really changed automation. It's really even changed human resources. Like take something like a background check from Alaska to Wyoming. That used to take a month. Now it's a second. So that's a paradigm shift. Okay. We mentioned the PR. They've got to reinvent their public relations and engagement because they're losing to, emotion over fact. So we've got to figure out that. But then you started looking at the bailout. Boy, if the energy industry took a bailout, that would be a major change because the initial knee-jerk reaction was no. Mike Summers from API came out and said no right away. Senator Cramer, you know that this is a tough subject right now because of all the things we just talked about, from OPEC to Corona to oil prices, that, when you start mentioning bailouts and things like that with the energy industry, boy, that would be a big change if the energy industry took a bailout. But I don't know. I'm not sure what to even think on this one.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And you're right. Mike has come out against the bailouts, as has APX. They represent sort of mid-size and up companies. The Independent Producers Association of America, they've said the same thing. DEPA is another organization. That's the one's headed up by Harold Hamm. None of them are asking for a bailout. There are various things that we're hearing from them, what they'd like. One of the major things is, and we've been talking about capital and access to capital and CapEx. At a time when the price is $30, the one thing that is happening, of course, is that interest rates have come down to where money's very cheap. At least, credit is very cheap. And it's probably coming down even further. I think access to liquidity is a pretty big piece of it that I think helps the industry a lot. The good news is that they've been on a pretty good run, although prices, recently have been low. They've been in a pretty good spot. Harold and the folks at DEPA are looking for possible investigation into anti-dumping, anti-dumping laws by Saudi Arabia. And I think that's relevant. It's certainly worth looking at, and they ought to be aware of it because I think it does fit. I think that, the documents that I've looked at, the history of anti-dumping and how it's been applied, it makes sense. But even that is not natural for the oil man because the oil man likes free, open global markets, and we are the stabilizer in those markets. But when you have big market players like Saudi Arabia and Russia manipulating the markets the way they are, I think they have a case to be made and that they should be reined in. On the other hand, and by the way, I also think that I do think there are some diplomatic things happening that hopefully will be successful along those lines. I signed a letter yesterday that Dan Sullivan, Dan is from Alaska. He and I put together a letter to the Crown Prince, Saudi Arabia, saying, knock it off. We are your ally. We've been your ally. We've defended you when it wasn't easy to defend you, and you ought not be dancing with Vladimir Putin. You better get your act together. So we put it on him pretty heavy and got a number of other senators to sign it. And I think there's some movement taking place, but you can't keep the pressure off either. But some of the other organizations, other companies, they would, of course, they want a resolution to the price war between the two big producing countries, but they also they're looking for capital, and I think we can do some things to free up more capital, and some of that we can do on the regulatory side as well, Jason. We often talk about low interest loans. What can the Federal Reserve do to provide more liquidity to the banks? I think they're doing that. I think you're going to see interest rates at or near zero by next week. And all of that will have certainly some stimulating benefit. But maybe there are some things on the regulatory side as well to drive down some of the costs, the unnecessary costs of whether it's pipelines or drilling itself, or frankly banking itself. We have a great distribution system of banks in this country. It doesn't have to be the federal government that's providing the money, but some of the regulations prevent these banks, who, by the way, have lots of cash. The banks themselves are fairly liquid because they've been required to be. as a result of former legislation.
That's what I always try to tell people is that even during a recession, there's still a lot of money out there. It's just more centralized, and you got to go find it, and you just got to build a better mousetrap or have a better steak sandwich at the end of the day. I mean, the money's still out there. You just got to go get it. And,
Yeah.
the conversation, though, about a bailout or not, to me, it was so interesting. And then the quick reaction back, like, it was almost like offensive, like they were offended that even the thought was there. But nevertheless, the conversation is being had. Another conversation I do want to ask you about, if you have time, is something that we've been pontificating here a little bit about, a little bit for fun, because we try to be more non-political and get more of the facts and the issues and that sort of thing. But is the flaring issue? It's obviously it's not only is it a problem, but it's easy to point a finger at it because you can see it and you can take pictures of it, and people don't like it. So, it's really even not that dirty, but it's just it's easy to point a finger at. So, we started saying, let's just take a look at wind and solar energy. Okay, they've gotten subsidies for 30 years, and they've put milestones out there, and they haven't really hit any of the milestones. And wind energy is still not affordable. It's not reliable. And solar energy still not reliable and affordable either. And it's not a bash on the industry. It's just where it's at. And they've gotten 30 years of subsidies. So I've often asked the question, what if we shifted some of those subsidies over to natural gas? So maybe these crazy, clever scientists that are sitting out and sleeping at well sites, checking monitors, can help solve that flaring issue. Maybe we get some new super plastic at the end of the day, or some new super feedstock. Who knows? But my point is that if they were subsidized, they might be able to solve that flaring issue. And then, of course, the industry gets upset because the word subsidy comes out. Well, now I see that somebody in the halls of Congress is starting to talk about a natural gas tax. So I'm going, okay, we should go back to the subsidy shift now. Talk to me a little bit about that whole thing when it comes to, is that anything that that you could even look at as a shift of subsidies to help that flaring problem? Because that is truly a solvable problem in the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, we know it is. I mean, the biggest challenge we have, of course, in North Dakota is that it's a byproduct of the oil itself, and the oil comes out rather easily and rather quickly, and there is an existing infrastructure for a lot of that. It's the expense and the permitting and the time lag for building out the gathering and transmission and even processing, of course, of the natural gas. That said, you make a lot of important points. The fact that we can see the flaring makes it difficult. The fact that we live in a cold climate and see flaring makes it downright immoral, because we think of what it costs to warm a home. Now, natural gas is so abundant, it's darn near free. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's so low cost. The commodity is priced so cheaply because of the abundance of it, that to me there should be natural market forces that provide the opportunity and the appropriate incentives to capture, gather, and process that gas. And you've seen a lot of it in North Dakota. It's just that it lags behind the oil side of the factor. Now, I hate to get back to coronavirus, but what we're experiencing right now in this state as a result of this price crash in oil, you're going to unfortunately see a slowdown in the build out of natural gas infrastructure. Whether that's, as you probably know, I mean, there were some large plans for natural gas processing facilities in the state this summer. I don't know anything yet, but I'm watching, reading the tea leaves, and I'm very concerned that some of the infrastructure that would have provided some of the relief, and not just relief for the flaring, but now use for the natural gas, whether it's processing and sending down the line or sending down the line wet to other processing facilities, at some point maybe some sort of a hydrocarbon or a plastics facility. All of those things are going to have great setbacks now as a result of price. Your question, however, is about subsidizing it. I think there are other ways to do it than subsidizing it. I think that we should help incent the appropriate market forces. For example, I met a couple of weeks ago in my office with somebody who's actually become a bit of an international friend. I think I've met with him 3 times now, but it is the energy minister from Poland. They would love to buy our natural gas rather than Russia's. We have big things. They remember when Donald Trump took so much criticism for suggesting to Angela Merkel that she should change her views on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and help rather facilitate the build out of a pipeline infrastructure in Europe that carries American gas. There's a lot of demand globally for what we produce here in the United States. The other thing, and you raised with the issue of subsidies, is electric generation. You talked about the intermittency of wind and solar, the lack of reliability to it on the grid, the fact that we have utilities in North Dakota talking, more about abandoning large, efficient coal plants because it's so cheap to do wind and solar and natural gas. Well, guess what? We just happen to produce a lot of natural gas in North Dakota as well, and we happen to have a lot of electric infrastructure. But we need to find ways to use that gas because it's a precious commodity, even though it's a low cost commodity right now. But the best way to get a better return on your dollar is to use more of it, and demand creates price. So as you can tell, I'm sort of lukewarm at best to the idea of subsidizing things, but I think there are some more natural market forces that we could help incent.
No, I agree. I'm here's a little insight on me. I helped start the Teenage Republicans in my high school, and so I mean to the core. But I'm one of those old school, like I guess they call them, was it Goldwater kind of guys? Government stay out of my checkbook. Right. Government stay out of my personal life. But hey, I'll help you build the roads. We want some right. We want some authority figures around to keep the riffraff out, that sort of thing. Right. And that's why again the subsidies. I hate even saying that word, but then again at the same time I'm going. I'd rather see, subsidies go into keeping the pipelines being built and keeping some of the flow going as so that Russia and Saudi Arabia and the coronavirus doesn't stop it in America when, we are really close to energy independence whenever we want to be.
No question.
Yeah, when we want to be is a different story, but. Just kind of wrapping up here. Go ahead.
Point, though. I want to just add to that point. You're making a really important point right here. Even if we're not, if we aren't on the books independent, we're capable of independence, and that's what makes us independent. And if this is why something like what DEPA is talking about in terms of an anti-dumping investigation and perhaps action with countervailing tariffs is a threat worth putting out there, because we are capable of independence. We're capable of dominance, as the president has mentioned. And the only thing keeping us from doing that is that we're part of a global market. But if the global market's not going to be fair to us, we can become independent real fast. And we are the consumers in this world. But we want to be able to sell our product as much as anything and use it for good around the world, because natural gas and oil, I'd say natural gas in particular right now, is a national security tool as opposed to a national security weapon. And that's why we should be looking for more ways to streamline the permitting process for gathering lines, transmission lines, export terminals, and then working with our trading partners around the world to work with us on import terminals and their own infrastructure, so they don't have to be beholden to Vladimir Putin for their natural gas supply.
Winding down here with Senator Kevin Cramer. Appreciate the overtime here today. And you mentioned Harold Hamm's name, and I did want to ask you about Harold Hamm, who on not only a personal level, but he's helped you on, I think, your campaign even a little bit. I think even
was my finance chairman.
Oh, I was going to say, I think he even shook a few hands on your behalf, but being your finance chairman, well, that's a little better. So,
it takes both hands and money.
Yeah, that's right. They wash each other too, I guess, but that's a different saying for a different day. Harold Hamm just recently got an honorary doctorate at University of North Dakota. Of course, being from a different state, that means he's done some incredible things for not only the university, but the state. And I do want to mention, too, before I let you talk a little bit about Harold Hamm, because you know him, like I say, on a personal and professional level, but we've had a lot of CEOs come and go in North Dakota from out of state. You know, we are a very big agriculture community. We're a very big oil community as well. We're a big tech community with Governor Burgum and Bill Gates connections. And to get an honorary doctorate like something like this shows that Harold Hamm is not only, you know, somebody who's done a lot of business with the state, but he's spent a lot of time getting to know the state, and he's done it in almost a maverick kind of way. You know, he really has, and that really has appealed to the people of North Dakota. So I just thought I'd start with that.
Well, you have really characterized Harold in an appropriate way, Jason. I think part of why we relate so well to Harold isn't just because of his generosity or just because of the incredible investment he's made in this state. But remember, he's even a pioneer in terms of our state, because when it comes to the combination of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, it is Harold who is credited with cracking that code. And when he did crack that code, he just happened to have about 1 million mineral acres right here in our state, and so he's made a major investment here. He is, while he still has an Oklahoma accent and a home in Oklahoma, he is a corporate citizen of North Dakota, and so in many respects he's appropriately, you know, considered the godfather of at least of the Bakken shale play. Now, I also have to say, Harold, the other part of why we like Harold is he's a lot like us. You know, he's been referred to as the blue collar billionaire. Because Harold's really more comfortable in hunting clothing than he is in a suit. Although he's become pretty good at wearing the suit, and you know, we see him a lot on the business shows on CNBC and Fox Business and Bloomberg TV, and he has to talk to the street. You know, you were talking about that a little bit earlier, that CEOs always have to sort of maintain a certain tone when they're talking, because there are people on Wall Street listening at all times, and it's, you know, credit rating agencies, investors, and you know, the institutional investors. But Harold's also an independent. So, and I think it's important to note, you know, to remember that he's really an independent, not just literally, but in his heart. And so he's a lot like a North Dakotan. And if you're to bump into Harold at the coffee shop, you could be talking to a rancher or a farmer or a mechanic, a geologist, or you know, an oil tycoon. You never know for sure. And so we just relate to him. But he's also invested significantly in the charities of our state and our education system, and sometimes in big flashy ways, and then sometimes the ways I'm familiar with, when it's not so big and flashy, but more anonymous and personal. Now, I would say he follows a lot of others like him. I mean, I think of somebody like John Hess, who I had a good visit with earlier this year. When I think about it, the legacy of Western North Dakota and oil and gas exploration and recovery and processing. I mean, Hess is really the legacy company for North Dakota. So and his name remains on the buildings. But Harold's special in that he's really made North Dakota not just a second home, but I'd almost say just another home. It's really it's almost equal to his roots in Oklahoma.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jason.